So, the title of this video is The Great Speciation Event. What is speciation? Speciation is the evolutionary process by which populations evolve to become distinct species. The biologist Orator F. Cook coined the term in 1906 for cladogenesis as opposed to anagenesis. We're going to talk about both. Cladogenesis is the evolutionary splitting of a parent species into two distinct species. Anagenesis is the gradual evolution of a species that continues to exist as an interbreeding population. The significance of a speciation event in this context is a plan that the world elite have for humanity. The example that I will use to explain speciation is in the genus Cucurbita. Most of you know these as squashes, and the method of organization that we use to distinguish separate species of squash is called taxonomy. The system of taxonomy was made mainstream by a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus. All living things are organized under a hierarchy of classifications: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. As far as I know, all species of a separate genus are isolated from each other by sterility barriers. In the case of squash, the 5 main domesticated species are mostly isolated from each other by sterility barriers. That is, the mechanism of reproductive isolation are a collection of evolutionary mechanisms, behaviors, and physiological processes critical for speciation. They prevent members of different species from producing offspring, or ensure that any offspring are sterile. One thing that is important to understand is that some cross-pollinations can occur. C. pepo, C. argyrosperma, and C. moscata. Also, C. maxima with C. moscata. This can mainly be attributed to the fact that the squash family had evolved in various parts of the Americas. Different environments have created genetic variances within the genus, but only resulted in a partial speciation because the lack of a complete reproductive or sterility barrier. This is what I will call a speciation in process. A better example of speciation within the plant world is the Fabaceae family, or the Leguminosae family. Commonly known, legumes, peas, beans. There are plenty of flowers that are in this genus, but let me show you 3 examples. Phaseolus vulgaris. This is the common launch bean and low bean that are in the gardens. This genus is native to the Americas and spans anywhere from Mesoamerica all the way down to the Andes region, resulting in 2 distinct gene pools. The cowpea, which is Vigna unguiculata, is a crop in the semi-arid region across Africa and Asia. Third species of beans is a wing bean, which grows abundantly in the hot, humid equatorial countries of South and Southeast Asia. Also, Papua New Guinea. These 3 separate environments, cultivated over thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, gave birth to 3 distinct gene pools of 3 identical plants of the family Fabaceae, creating 3 separate genuses and multiple separate species, actively creating a speciation event that led to permanent sterility barriers. Members of the animal kingdom are far more complex in terms of cellular organization. Therefore, speciation events are more difficult to track and identify, presumably because of the time required and because animals are capable of voluntary migration, increasing the occurrence of gene pool mixing. Let's look at the example of the liger. Liger is a hybrid offspring of a male lion from the genus Panthera, species Leo, and a female tiger, genus Panthera, species Tigris. Male ligers are consequently sterile, while female ligers are not. Haldane's rule is an observation about the early stage of speciation formulated in 1922 by British evolutionary biologist J.B.S. Haldane that states that if in a species hybrid only one sex is inviable or sterile, that sex is more likely to be the heterogametic sex. In other words, that is the sex with two different chromosomes. It just so happens to be that in both cats and humans, the heterogametic sex are the males with XY chromosome. The important part to understand about a successful speciation is a complete reproductive barrier between species within a genus. In instances where a speciation event, or in this case a speciation process, only goes as far as exhibiting Haldane's rule, the speciation event is not complete. A speciation event is not necessarily a natural event that takes millions of years. A partial example of speciation can be seen in something called animal husbandry, or in other words, domestic breeding. So, what does this have to do with humans and the great speciation event? One of the easiest ways to understand the goal of the New World Order and the speciation event is through the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. As I showed you before, all living things are categorized under Carl Linnaeus' taxonomic system: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Human beings are of this species Homo sapiens. However, the plan of the New World Order is to create a speciation event that divides the races and creates a caste system, just like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Understanding the content in this book will allow your imagination to draw a clear picture of what future civilization will look like, as well as what the past civilization once looked like. And what I'm referring to when I say advanced civilization of the past, I am not referring to the proverbial caveman. I am talking about a highly advanced global society that explored all facets of chemistry, biology, and physics, potentially leading to an empire that had interstellar capabilities, or at the very least multiplanetary. Take, for example, the Silurian hypothesis. It's a thought experiment where researchers imagined an advanced civilization before humans and pondered whether it would be possible to detect an industrial civilization in the geological record. They wrote, "While we strongly doubt that any previous industrial civilization existed before our own, asking the question in a formal way that articulates explicitly what evidence for such a civilization might look like raises its own useful questions related both to astrobiology and Anthropocene studies." Contrary to the conclusion of the Silurian hypothesis, I'm going to show the overwhelming evidence that there once was a society that existed before a cataclysm struck Earth. One of the greatest reference points for talking about such ideas is the term antediluvian. Antediluvian is a biblical term meaning pre-flood. Flood that is being referenced is the flood of the Bible. However, many other cultures and religions reference a flood. For example, Hinduism has a flood and a central character named Manu. Sumerian mythology has the Epic of Gilgamesh. Plenty of cultures around the globe that reference a flood in the not too distant past. Because most of the listeners will be more familiar with the Bible, throughout this presentation I will use the Bible as a reference point. However, I do have to make a disclaimer that labeling the flood as the cataclysm that erased the past world is a terrible injustice to truth in the actual history of humanity. And as you will see later on in this presentation, I am going to label any of the institutions of knowledge and information such as NASA, the Smithsonian, subsequently many, if not all, of the universities, not just here in America, but around the globe. They happen to go hand in hand with secret societies. Many of the religious institutions as being guilty of gatekeeping. In other words, the activity of controlling and usually limiting general access to something, in this case, knowledge, knowledge of our true history. And the topic of discussion is, humans were more advanced technologically in the distant past than we are today. Due to malevolent forces manipulating humanity, as I said, gatekeeping, true history is suppressed, and we are told by owned education systems that we are at the height of science and technology, and this is not true. Now on to the first lesson. What proof do we have of an advanced civilization that is within the archaeological record? In my opinion, the Giza Pyramid Complex is the most known wonders of the ancient world, and much like the Bible, is a reference point that will serve as the most common denominator. In the Giza Pyramid Complex rests on the lower Nile just before the delta into the Mediterranean Sea. The accepted narrative of the Great Pyramids of Giza is attributed to the pharaoh Khufu approximately 4,600 years before present. The evidence used to date the construction of the pyramids is based upon items such as clay seals bearing the name of Khufu. The radiocarbon dated material that was found within the pyramids consists of things along the likes of the mummies found within the pyramids, pottery. There was a cedar plank found within the chambers. There was also worker graffiti. Other evidence that is used to date the pyramids is the mortar that is between some of the stones. I don't know the exact quantity of mortar joints that were sampled and how many there are in the entire construction of the pyramids, but the charcoal that was used as a mix for the mortar is dated to around the same time as the large construction project that was during Khufu's reign. However, this still doesn't explain some of the exactitudes of the pyramids that are treated more as folklore than actual science. The method of construction for the pyramids is still unknown to modern-day Egyptologists. Some of the examples that we have is the base of the pyramids is measured to be horizontally flat within 21 millimeters. That's 0.8 inches. Another remarkable attribute of the pyramids is its alignment to the cardinal directions. Sides of the Great Pyramid's base are closely aligned to the 4 geographic cardinal directions, deviating on average 3 minutes and 38 seconds of arc. Forgive me for saying that this is astronomically accurate for a Neolithic civilization. One of the other remarkable attributes of not only the pyramid, but the Sphinx as well, called the Orion correlation theory. And according to Graham Hancock, we have demonstrated with a substantial body of evidence that the pattern of stars that is frozen on the ground at Giza in the form of 3 pyramids and the Sphinx represents the disposition of the constellations of Orion and Leo as they looked at the moment of sunrise on the spring equinox during the astronomical age of Leo. In other words, the epoch in which the sun was housed by Leo on the spring equinox. Like all precessional ages, this was a 2,160-year time. It is generally calculated to have fallen between the Gregorian calendar dates of 10,970 and 8,810 BC. That is anywhere between 11 and 13,000 years ago. Further supporting evidence includes the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis. The short version of the story is that geologist Robert Schoch presented the idea in 1992 that based upon water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure wall, I want people to understand the variables that we are dealing with concerning the Sphinx. And what I'm referring to is, here we have a graphic showing 2 different types of erosion. Wind erosion moving horizontally across the face of the rock, and water erosion moving vertically down the face of the rock. As you can see here, the encasing wall of the Sphinx has both wind and significant water erosion. Here's a clip of Graham Hancock on the Joe Rogan Experience that I edited down to cut out some of the aimless dialogue.
If you don't mind, Graham, could you please, for people, so this could be a standalone thing, people could understand, what is the argument about the Sphinx, the enclosure of the Sphinx? And Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University, who's a geologist, what was his conclusion?
What Schoch is saying is that the Sphinx and the trench out of which the Sphinx is cut bears the unmistakable evidence of precipitation-induced weathering caused by exposure to a substantial period of heavy rainfall. And that is particularly pointed out in the vertical fissures in the trench. So you see, the Sphinx itself has been subject to so much restoration over so many years that it's difficult for people to even see the core body of the Sphinx today. But it's these, you can see the vertical fissures even down at the back of there. That is what Schoch counts as rainfall, precipitation-induced weathering, heavy rainfall, which is selectively removing the softer layers and leaving the harder layers in place. And the problem is we don't have that rainfall in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall. I would say that the ground plan, what we have at Giza, the basic layout of the site, was established in what the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi, the first time. Astronomically and geologically, I and my colleagues suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12,500 to 13,000 years ago. That was when the site was laid out, because there's intriguing astronomical alignments of the Great Pyramids to the Belt of Orion. I know Ed Krupp has a completely opposite view on this. And of the Great Sphinx to the constellation of Leo, rising due east, housing the sun on the equinox, the astrological age of Leo. Again, age of Leo pretty much exactly spans the Younger Dryas, as a matter of fact.
And so the only argument against that at the time was that there were no other structures like that from 12,000 years ago.
Correct. And that paper really doesn't date the Sphinx. It works with dating of large blocks in the valley and the Sphinx temples. There's not a single sample taken from the Sphinx.
All right, then who dated it?
Who dated it? Liritsis and Vafiadu.
And then why do mainstream archaeologists not accept the older date for the Sphinx? And the answer is because they have a bunch of other evidence that points to the date that they think it does.
The answer is to your question is very simple. Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass put it on record back in 1992 when John Anthony West and Robert Schoch first presented the rainfall erosion evidence on the Sphinx. And what Lehner and Hawass said is, the Sphinx can't possibly be 12,000 plus years old because there was no other culture anywhere in the world that was capable of creating large-scale monumental architecture like this. Show me one other structure that's capable of doing that. Well, they could say that in 1992, Michael, but they can't say it in 2017, not since Göbekli Tepe's been.
To review what Graham Hancock was saying, that in 1992, the counter-argument for the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis is that no other civilization was capable of large-scale constructions such as this. However, now, since the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, the entire narrative of Neolithic culture's relation to megalithic construction has to be rearranged. Göbekli Tepe is a Neolithic archaeological site in Turkey, dated between 9,500 and 8,000 years BCE. The site comprises a large number of circular structures supported by massive stone pillars, the world's oldest known megaliths. In October of 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavations, later went on to uncover an entire settlement. What was found at Göbekli Tepe was so significant that the entire history of humanity must be rewritten. We will dig deeper into Göbekli Tepe later on in this presentation. For now, we move on to the topic. Here is an aerial view of the main excavation area of Göbekli Tepe. Notice that the entire site is covered completely in debris, and excavations have to be done to uncover what is hidden beneath the land. The carvings that closely resemble hieroglyphs are interesting enough, as well as the figurines found within the excavation area. The monumental discoveries of Göbekli Tepe are the occurrence of megaliths. A megalith is a large prehistoric stone that has been used to construct a structure or monument, either alone or together with other stones. Let's take a look at some of the pictures of the megaliths, as we can see here. in a circular fashion around the center, and many other places. More megaliths in a stone wall enclosure. Another view of the megaliths, appearing to have supported some type of roof or platform. The significance of these megaliths contradicts the idea that hunter-gatherers of those times were unable to carry out large-scale construction and formation of such stone projects. This brings us to the world's largest confirmed megalith, the Temple of Bacchus in Baalbek, Lebanon. The question that we have to ask regarding these megaliths is, how were they constructed and how were they moved into place? One of the stones found at a quarry near Baalbek is recorded to be the world's largest known ancient block. Measures around 20 meters by 6 meters by 5 meters, and it is estimated to weigh approximately 1,650 tons to 1,820 tons. The problem with those numbers is that humans don't have any point of reference to fathom the magnitude of these accomplishments. The largest monolith ever lifted by multiple cranes was 108 tons. That's less than 10% of the total estimated weight of the largest megalith in the world. To put that into perspective, 1,650 tons is approximately 3.3 million pounds, and 1,821 is approximately 3.64 million pounds. To compare that to modern day terms, a typical Boeing 747 weighs 487.5 tons, or approximately 1/4 the weight of the world's largest megalith. Which just goes to show that experiments to move megaliths less than 5% of the weight of the Baalbek Trilithon or Colossi of Memnon failed even when they cheated. Explanations for our social evolution that ignore this unsolved mystery have serious credibility problems at best. Here are the pictures of the famous Baalbek Trilithons from a documentary that will be in the description. I suggest that at this point in my video, you go and watch this video to get a very good description or a virtual tour of Baalbek to understand exactly how magnificent this site is. As we take a look at the map of the globe, we can see the proximity that these sites have in relation to each other. Göbekli Tepe up here, Baalbek over here in Lebanon, and here is where the Giza Pyramid Complex is. I hope it's not too far-fetched to think that maybe there was an advanced civilization that escaped the historical records, or our fragmented historical records don't show the connectivity and complexity of what happened thousands of years ago. This is a very viable perspective or explanation for some of the misunderstandings surrounding Mesopotamian archaeology. Let's take a trip. All the way over here. To a place in the Caucasus Mountains called Gornaya Shoria. Here we're looking at the Gornaya Shoria megaliths, rock formations in Siberia, Russia. It is reported that the largest pieces or blocks of stone have estimated weights between 3 and 4,000 tons, which would make them larger than the megaliths at Baalbek. For an in-depth look into megalithic Siberia, I'm going to take cuts from a video that has a much more profound understanding of the ancient archaeological sites in the region. The link will be in the description.
Now this is Gornaya Shoria, and it is located south of the Atoll mountain range, and it has mainstream scientists working overtime to try and describe this from a natural perspective, because what we are looking at is clearly the remains of a vast ancient wall. However, mainstream sources do not want to describe it as such. Now, it was understudy in 1991, but with the fall of the Soviet Union, that study was abandoned, and it has since been unable to secure enough funding to be studied again. But this is just one of the many areas in Siberia that speak a history that mainstream sources do not want to talk about. Because the tolerances, as we've seen, between these massive ancient blocks is staggering, and the size of the blocks themselves is absolutely mind-blowing. Now this is Gornaya Shoria in Siberia, and if you compare this to the stone of the pregnant woman in Baalbek, I think this one's a bit bigger. And the level of workmanship, especially after what we can consider a fairly destructive set of years, a fairly hard period of time in which these blocks have withstood wars and battles and destruction by the elements, weathering, fatigue. They've fared fairly decently. And you can see the size of the obelisk that they cut was again, these are in the thousands of the tons. And we'll see these later on, but the size of these boggles the mind. Look at that, in front of it is a tree. There is a man stood next to it. Now these must be hundreds of tons, if not close to the thousands. And there is the angle on these such blocks. It is almost definitely a wall. Now this is a relatively famous area for rock climbers known as the Devil's Hill Fort. And again we see what looks like these vast stone slabs. However, at the bottom, the traces of the artificial activity are a wee bit more apparent. And I don't know if nature could quite precisely replicate that angle there. The Seven Brothers, this looks like the Devil's Hill Fort that we've seen earlier, but this is a separate site. This is 30 kilometres away, and I believe what we are looking at is just the other side of the wall, because as you can see it looks almost exactly the same. Now the founder of the Ural Science Society in the 19th century was actually quoted as saying, "Are these not the remnants of cyclopean structures of a great ancient people?" And again, to describe them as looking like anything other than blocks would be dishonest. Especially at these lower areas, the angles on some of these are completely unnatural. And again, there's these blocks that are fairly well preserved at the bottom. And this is the Amur pillars. And we can see again this giant, almost perfectly square slab. And this is what the Amur pillars looks like from afar, and just to give you a wee bit of relativity here, there is a couple of people. So the size of these megalithic blocks is absolutely outstanding. And you can see why mainstream sources have to deny them and claim that they are natural, because they would absolutely blow any other form of obelisk or megalithic block out of the water. Again, this is at the site of the Amur pillars. And if that isn't an obelisk, then I do not know what is. These are the remains of ancient stairs. And again, there's the grottos. We'll see a couple more of these grottos as we look at other photos. These are just some that I collected in the area prior to compiling this video. And to deny that they look like massive blocks placed on top of each other is impossible. The tooling that would have went into creating these and actually getting them into place must have been outstanding. How they done it boggles the mind, especially given that the technology that we attribute to them. But this is in an area that mainstream sources claim was not developed prior to the 17th century. We'll see this later on. Now, Siberia, historians claim, had a relatively low population density for pretty much the whole of human history, until again after the conquest, or what mainstream sources call the exploration of Siberia by Yermak. Now this took place in the 17th century, So really we shouldn't be seeing any sites that display inhabited civilization prior to that. Mainstream sources claim that the settlers of Siberia prior to the development of Siberia were nomadic settlers with no structures and no traces left behind of their civilization bar trinkets. These giant megalithic walls tell another story. This is the Anu Pillars, and I think this is just outside Chelyabinsk, and again completely reminiscent of a giant ancient wall. This is the Arakan Shihan Peninsula, and again this is next to Chelyabinsk. We see in almost every single one of these areas the size of these blocks is absolutely staggering, ranging from 40 tons to thousands in some cases. The size of these blocks is absolutely staggering, however, to describe that as looking like anything other than a wall would be dishonest. And again, the same area, Arakul Shihan, and the process of weathering that would have made every single one of these sites, these megalithic sites, look exactly like flat slabs laid one on top of each other is beyond me. Especially just rising out of the mountain range like that. Explaining that from a natural perspective to me seems difficult to impossible. This is the Kakis megaliths as they are known. And again, these are mere stone tents. You can see that they are completely separated from block to block. But to describe them as artificial, scientists would have to completely rewrite modern history, or at least the history of Siberia. This is Kruglitsa Mountain. This is 15 kilometers outside of Chelyabinsk. Now what we are looking at here is granite. These are massive granite slabs, and the angles on them look completely artificial, and in some cases we can still see what looks like cutting marks as opposed to evidence of weathering or erosion. And I don't know how nature manages to pull off a right angle quite like that. Lyuskynye rocks, again another vast ancient wall. And you can see the separations between these blocks in almost every single one, and they take on nearly a uniform shape. And that's what it looks like from an aerial view. Again, that is almost certainly a wall. Sitting at the bottom is the remains of some of the destroyed portions, and you can see how these stone slabs, or stone tents as they're called in Russia, were made up. This is Mount Pidan. This is a wee bit further north in Siberia, and that looks to me completely artificial. And in the area again we see these massive traces of cutting marks all the way along, these parallel lines, these intersecting lines cut deep within the rock. And I don't know how anybody can claim that that is anything other than an ancient wall. The only problem is it's in an area that historians claim was not settled, was not developed. However, I have no idea how they can get away with looking us in the eye and telling us that that is anything other than a wall. Same area, Mount Pidan, and we have blocks like this. We can only guess as to their function these days, but we can easily conclude that they are not natural. And in the area you can see the scattered remains of what was once there. The vast amount of these rocks in the ground tell you just how developed this area was, and just how large the scale of the destruction was. Because everywhere we see almost the same site in Siberia. This is still Mount Pidan, again remains of another wall. Look at the lines on here, look at the angles, look at the way that these blocks cut in. The angles are almost perfectly 90 degrees.
Let us move away from Gornaya Sharia. We journey eastward. We journey eastward to the Yangshan Quarry just outside of Nanjing, home of the largest megaliths unconfirmed to man. The Yangshan Quarry houses the largest megaliths known, believed to be undertaken in the 15th century. The largest megalith weighs 16,000 tons. Here is a link to a YouTube channel that gives a tour and explanation of the entire Yangshan Quarry site. You can see that the bone of the pregnant mother is quarried in the same fashion as the Yangshan Quarry. These uncompleted megaliths are, without a doubt, evidence of an interconnected society. But in order to solidify everything and rewrite history, we have to travel across the ocean. To the former Incan Empire, hiding within the countries of Bolivia and Peru.
Today we're exploring the ancient site of Ollantaytambo in the northern part of the Sacred Valley of Peru outside of Cusco, the capital of the Inca. So this is the main approach to the site of Ollantaytambo, and there you can now see the vast size and expanse of this huge Inca complex. Massive Inca terraces. You can see the scale of it in comparison to regular sized human beings. And these are again a phenomenal accomplishment by the Inca civilization. So we're now going up the staircase. This is a reconstructed staircase made by the Inca, utilizing some of the megalithic blocks that they found broken, and then they used filler of local stone to build these walls. This is a very tightly fitting polygonal wall, which is of Inca construction. As you can see here again, and then there is a transition into the older megalithic work, which you can see right now. This again is the pre-Inca megalithic work. It will become inherently clear that the site was hit by a massive cataclysm in the distant past, and the Inca inherited the structure and rebuilt it. There you see megalithic on the left and Inca in front. Look at the incredible tight fitting of the older megalithic work. No clay or mortar of any kind. So tight fitting you can't fit a human hair in the joins. Just look at that astonishing level of precision. Again, the astonishing level of the megalithic precision. Look at the complex angles and corners. However, what we also find are megalithic aspects, and it's most likely that the megalithic works predate the Inca by several thousand years, and the damage could very well have been from a massive ancient cataclysm. It's quite clear that the Inca found an abandoned megalithic complex and tried their best to repair it, such as putting those little stones underneath to support. This is the great megalithic wall of 6 huge stones, some weighing up to 70 tons. And notice these curious shims that have knobs on them as well. Some believe that these were put in place as earthquake proofing. Now when we walk to the back side of this wall, you see once again giant megalithic blocks and then Inca repair work on top. There has been little or no work done in the centuries after the Inca. So what you're looking at is Inca repair work of megalithic structures. Now walking up a relatively crude Inca staircase. And once again, massive megalithic blocks, and in between, filler put in place by the Inca. And this is another example of that. You can see the relative rubble put in between the giant multi-ton megalithic blocks. It's quite possible that the Inca were able to shift some of the giant stones into place, but were not able to rebuild it the way that it was originally.
Sacsayhuaman is one of the largest archaeological sites not only in Peru, but in South America, and covers hundreds of acres. It was, of course, in large part constructed by the great Inca culture. However, we do find evidence that there was a previous culture that in fact had superior technology, mysterious technology that was far more profound than the bronze chisels and stone hammers employed by the Inca. Here, for the first time, you can see the great zigzag wall at Sacsayhuaman. Again, usually visitors only see this and not the rest of the great constructions in this huge archaeological site.
And now we're going to see how big these stones are. Look at the people in comparison to the size of these giant stones. Again, it's metamorphosed limestone, so it's much harder than the bronze tools of the Inca. In terms of scale, some of these stones weigh 40 tons, and there are at least two, such as this one, that weigh about 120 tons. Now here, once again, the sense of scale and also how tight-fitting the stones are. Any gaps that are present are earthquake damage, maybe from the time of the cataclysm, maybe from Inca times, but it's a sense of size, scale, and precision which is absolutely profound. Now, when you see smaller stones in the upper areas, that's an indication either of Inca repair or possibly even more modern repair work. And there on the right side, upper area, you can see the smaller stones. Much of that is presumed to be Inca repair work done somewhere between 1,000 and 500 years ago. And as we go past these two giant megalithic blocks, have a look at the staircase. Notice that the stairs are made of small stones with mortar. So this is an Inca construction at the megalithic site. It appears that there were no megalithic staircases originally, which is very curious. And there again, the stairs are Inca, smaller stones with mortar. Now we're at Tiwanaku in Bolivia and flying over the famous Sun Gate. You can notice that the erosion on this side of the Sun Gate is much more severe than the other side, which tells us that it was lying down for a very long period of time. And now quadcopter Pachacutec is flying over Pumapunku, which is right next door to Tiwanaku. It's in fact the same complex. On the left, you see two of the famous H blocks. And in total, there are 9 H blocks located at the Puma Punku site. Notice the massive slabs of stone as well. Those were likely the foundations, and some of them are broken, some of them are literally half buried. You could tell just by looking at it that this was the scene of a massive ancient cataclysm. And there, featuring 4 of the famous H blocks, as seen on Ancient Aliens and other shows. Now, we're at the Inti Punku, which is about an hour's drive south of Cusco. Again, you can notice that there are megalithic elements and then Inca components or elements constructed on top. So the megalithic likely predates the Inca by several thousands of years. And here we have a great shot of quadcopter Pachacutec flying through one of the 2 entrance exits of the Inti Punku Sun Gate.
So that was clips from Brian Forrester's YouTube channel. And you can find more video here. Link will be in the description. Also, this video to watch showing some of the precision cuts around the site of Sacsayhuaman. One of the things that I would like to focus on here is the evidence of 3 different eras of construction. These larger stones obviously being the megalithic era. Then this tightly fashioned polygonal construction, presumably being Incan, reconstruction or replication. Even if the Inca were able to mimic what they saw with these megaliths here, this would presumably be the maximum size rock and stone that they were able to process, move, and assemble. And this evidently being Incan or later. Another interesting feature of the megaliths is the inside corner construction. And this is important to note based on the roundedness of the stones. It's unexplainable how the architects were able to build stones in this fashion. Again, another inside corner. It's more efficient in terms of structural integrity, but in terms of the process for creating a stone such as this, massively inefficient and in some cases nearly impossible. Again, more inside corner polygonal construction. Here are instances of inside corner polygonal construction all over South America and Egypt. Also Easter Island. One of the flyovers in Tiwanaku, you will see one of these keystones. You will see one of these keystone cuts in the ground. And keystones were a way of fashioning two blocks together. These keystones would be on the ground, placed face up with a metal clasp in it. We see them everywhere from Ethiopia, India, Bolivia, Japan, Cambodia, Iran, Egypt, Greece, Tunisia, Italy, Peru, all over the world. This is taken from a lecture. Photos taken by somebody inspecting these ones. No, can't remember the name of the temple, but I'll add it in when I go through and I do when I go through and I do the final draft. I'll have the name of the temple and whatever. But look, here is the keystone cut that was placed erroneously by the people who reconstructed this building. And this is the same. This is in Egypt. This is the same allegations or indictments that knowledgeable archaeologists have of these so-called ancient dynastic cultures as being squatters, vandals, and people who just reconstructed stuff that they had lying around. They didn't know what they were doing with keystone cuts, evidently. And you even listen to the Greeks, they say the Temple of Delphi was given to them by the gods. a lot of the stuff that we take as history, all of ancient Egypt, is more than likely people who found it and made it part of their culture. That's just it. That's not how a keystone cut is used. Also, you notice the three different styles of, and you see that these pillars are cut. And if we were to go to the capitals of Egypt, you can find pillars that are solid, and humans don't have a way of creating, moving, and standing these solid pillars that are this size. We just don't. So all of this was reconstructed. And so these next graphics shows the archway construction method, the three doors. This is Masonic iconography. This imagery right here is what the Masons put in all their secret messages. You'll see it: Mexico, Egypt, Indonesia. Again, more evidence of a interconnected global society, highly advanced. Da Vinci even put it in his famous painting. Da Vinci was initiated in Masonic knowledge. Following information is honestly news to me, and it is groundbreaking, pun intended. As you'll see, the author and investigator Jared Murphy, who I believe works with historical restorations, was on Leak Project as recent as June 10th. This is the first I've ever heard of him. And he has a website called Not Aliens. He wrote a book called It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us. And it's a book based upon... Anyways, the idea that Jared Murphy presents is... Listen, there are stone spheres found all across the world. The Moraki boulders in New Zealand, same as the stone spheres of Costa Rica, ranging anywhere from this massive one, 8.7 feet, to the size of a golf ball and smaller. The stone spheres here in Torish, Kazakhstan. Here's more images of the stone spheres. The stone spheres in the Arctic Circle, Champ Island, and stone spheres found in Bosnia. They're found everywhere around the world. The idea presented by Jared Murphy is that these stone spheres are actually seismic wave shields using cubic arrays of split ball resonators. We are looking at earthquake-proof foundation. The seismic wave shield using these spheres coincides with the occurrence of Chernosm, so biochar, okay, that's pyrolyzed carbon, also known as terra preta. It occurs all over the world, specifically engineered with a specific formula and ratio, having piezoelectric properties. In other words, the electric charge that accumulates in certain solid materials such as crystals, ceramics, biological matter such as bone, DNA, and various proteins. So we're looking at dual purpose engineered soils, as well as foundations filled with stone spheres, not only for the purpose of stabilizing the foundation during seismic activity, but potentially for the purpose of harnessing electricity or energy. I don't have the links. I'll have to go and find them. Again, that's a final edition cut, but there's significant underground excavation information surrounding all of the Central American pyramids. And what this also has to do with, potentially, where we're going to talk about the electromagnetic field of the Earth, the ionization of the atmosphere, and the ability of the pyramids to harness those ionic currents that travel around the world and to work with telluric currents or earth current. It's an electrical current, it moves underground or through the sea. Telluric currents result from both natural causes and human activity, and the discrete currents interact in a complex pattern. The currents are extremely low frequency and can travel over large areas at or near the surface of the Earth. Some of the effects that this has, for example, grounding, walking barefoot on the Earth. There is medical research and confirmed evidence that walking on the Earth has healing properties. So when we talk about specifically engineered soil, fashioned with ionic and telluric magnifiers, we see the potential for these ancient races these ancient civilizations creating an environment that heals itself and the organisms that partake in it. Storing energy in the earth. We don't need lithium batteries. There's already lithium in the ground. Now, as we'll see, many of the stone spheres are near the coast. At least in the case of Costa Rica, the ones in New Zealand, several other areas around the world. Understand that the coastal areas are all victim of erosion and 1,000 years ago were not exposed. Just imagine the stone spheres that simply have not been uncovered. Now, this is 100% supported by the early Holocene sea level rise. A significant jump in sea level by about 60 meters or 197 feet during the early Holocene, between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago, spanning the Eurasian Mesolithic. The rapid rise in sea level associated with climate change, 8.2 thousand years ago cooling event, and the loss of coastal land favored by early farmers may have contributed to the spread of Neolithic revolution to Europe in its Neolithic period. Most specifically focusing on the area of northwestern Europe, we look at maps of something called Doggerland, and what you will see in the green is all the areas that were once land 15,000 years ago. How much of this evidence of civilization, because we know that primitive cultures favored settling on the coast, has been lost, eroded, and buried by the ocean. Take that to a global scale. If we look at Google Maps, we can see that Doggerland almost perfectly traces these light blue areas that seem to create a shelf and even an erosion of silt that flows down into this area. Do we see this? How this works? Now, if you don't see what I see, take a look here. Do we see this slightly darker shade of blue running just along Norway as if it was once a river? Well, there you have it. It's called the Norwegian Trench. So as we zoom out, with the estimation or the idea that most of this light shaded blue area was once solid terrain 15,000 years ago prior to the early Holocene sea level rise, it creates an entirely different landscape all around the planet. Entirely new islands and archipelagos pop up all across Indonesia would have been considered a continent or a subcontinent. We look at the Pacific and can only wonder how many islands and settlements have been washed away. The Americas as well. Taking a look at Alaska. And just to explain what I mean in regards to underwater currents, this is the best image I could find of a diver being swept away. Now, if you could imagine 15,000 years of this type of underwater currents, just about everything would be eroded to dust. So we have evidence of pyramids underwater off the coast of Japan. It's called the Yonaguni Monument. Massive megalithic structures underwater. Also, megaliths outside of Cuba. Apparently, Fidel Castro allowed oceanographers to photograph this settlement that was found outside of Cuba. Resembles almost exactly Central American remains, and it makes perfect sense. Now, here's where things get crazy. The underwater pyramid discovered near Portugal. So if we take a look at the map, and I show you exactly where this place is. Now, Portugal is here, and it's off the coast of Portugal, out here. In between these two islands, underwater, here. So, if this does not fit the story of Atlantis, this slightly blue area, if this does not fit the description of Atlantis, just based upon it being swallowed by the ocean, then I don't know what does. 15,000 years ago, with pyramids underwater. Wrong tab. With pyramids underwater. The idea of a past civilization being submerged by ocean water is not anecdotal or conjecture. We have an abundance of sources of scientific data that we can use to support this hypothesis. First is the early Holocene sea level rise. It was a significant jump in sea level by about 60 meters or 197 feet during the early Holocene between about 12,000 and 7,000 years ago, spanning the Eurasian Mesolithic. The rapid rise in sea level and associated climate change, notably the cooling event that took place 8,200 years ago and the loss of coastal and land favored by early farmers, may have contributed to the spread of Neolithic revolution to Europe in its Neolithic period. Stories that we see around the world, without a doubt, coincide during the proverbial flood that happened in the Bible with the main character, Noah. This, of course, is a narrative of the Abrahamic faith, but there are other belief systems, not only within the area, but around the globe, that share the same narrative. Sumerian mythology, we see a flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The god Enki tasks the character Utanapishtim with the task of building a boat to survive a flood. In Hinduism, the character Manu plays the very same role. In Hopi mythology, there is also a flood that destroys the world. Here's a clip from Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson on the Joe Rogan Experience. The link will be in the description.
We're looking at a place in western Montana called Camas Prairie. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start sweeping around as the video plays, and you're going to notice down here a series of ripples.
Oh, okay, I see that.
Okay, and I'm going to have Jamie pause in a second, but let's keep coming around. Do you start seeing the ripples on the landscape? Let's pause right there. Right there, let's pause. Now, I wish I had a pointer, but if you look up, you're going to see a flat piece of land like a tongue coming out, rounded. Yeah, that's a delta. And a river comes into a body of water and it's carrying sediment. And because the river is moving along swiftly, it's carrying the sediment, but when it comes into the standing body of water, it slows down and it drops its sediment. It builds a delta. And then in front of it, we're seeing rippled landscape. Let's keep coming around, Jamie. And so
Rippled landscape that looks exactly like the beach looks.
Yeah, keep coming around with that.
That's the thing, it's fractal, because this is the whole mystery of this, that this happens at a scale of inches on beaches and a scale of hundreds of feet here.
Stop again.
Good Lord.
Now, right here in the middle, you see a massive delta.
Yes.
Spewed out like a big tongue, splayed out. And then right down here, you start seeing the ripples. And there's a farmhouse. You see the farmhouse there? Now, those ripples are, the tallest ones are about the height of a 5-story building.
Whoa.
Look at this.
This is crazy.
This is totally crazy.
These ripples, repeated ripples in an area where there's nothing else like it.
This is the fingerprints of the flood. That's
Yeah.
what it is. And I think you made the crucial point, Joe, which is that we can understand what this is because we can see it on any beach. We can see how water flows receding across a sandy medium will produce ripples. But here, they're on this unbelievable scale where they're hundreds of feet long and 50 feet high, where they dwarf houses, and they're lying all across. And what that tells us is that a huge water flow went across this plain and did this.
Can I ask you, is there a dispute to this? Is there a,
No, nobody disputes it.
nobody disputes
it.
this is
No,
from a flood?
not anymore.
Wow.
No. In fact, it was this JT Pardee.
Let's be clear. Nobody disputes that it was caused by massive water flows.
Exactly.
But
The
those same
V-cells.
people would still not buy into the notion that there was this one humongous flood.
Okay, so they think it's an accumulative effect, but that this was all created
This
by
was the bottom
water.
of Lake Missoula, right?
Yes. And the water here, Joe, that did this, the way to visualize this is to, again, begin to think a tsunami. You have to think tsunami because tsunami is the closest scale of water flow that we've experienced in modern times. No river flood has even approached this.
Right.
You know, no flood in any floodplain.
Nothing that we can put into perspective.
Right. The closest we can get to it is a tsunami. But even there, you got to picture the tsunamis that we've experienced in the last decade and a half in Indonesia and Japan. When they made landfall, those tsunamis were roughly between 20 and 50 feet, depending on where you were relative to the oncoming wave and how far distant you were from it. Here, what you have to visualize is a tsunami sweeping over the land that's over 1,000 feet deep. That's what happened here. And we know that because we can trace the high water marks on the hillsides are clearly left. The high water marks are clearly etched into the hillsides. So we now know, based upon the study of the ripples, and the water here was moving down. It's filling this basin. It's rushing in a great tsunami from the north of fresh water, meltwater, coming off the ice sheet. And it's sweeping down over this land at probably 200 or 300 million cubic feet per second, which is an inconceivable amount of water. It's many times in excess of every river flowing on Earth, flowing today all at once. It's beyond that many times, 10 or 20 times beyond that. One of these flood flows here is 3 orders of magnitude greater than the largest measured modern flood. In other words, over 1,000 times greater. In terms of peak discharge or volume, you would have to scale up at least 1,000 times greater than any modern measured flood to get to the smallest, really, of these flows here. Because this is just one place, one locale on 5 states where you can trace an ocean of fresh water sweeping across the entire Pacific Northwest, pretty much washing away anything that was there. Okay, what you're looking at there is a gigantic extinct set of cataracts, like you would find at Niagara Falls, but to use Graham's term, writ large. We're looking at a ridge. We're looking east. The tsunami wave that swept down over these 4 states, one branch of it swept off to the west. This particular branch of it was 400 feet deep when it hit this ridge. And what it did was it spilled over the ridge, and down here in the foreground you see the modern-day Columbia River. From the top of the ridge, where you see the agriculture and the landscape, down to the river is about 1,000 feet.
Whoa.
So you basically have to picture you've got this huge sheet of water, 300 to 400 feet deep. It's rushing over, and it finds the lowest spot within this ridge, and that's where it starts focusing its energy. And as it does, it begins to just strip away the rock. Now, what you're looking at here is this cataract complex is about 5 miles across. And the water came, and you see you've got those kind of curved Finger Lakes at the top.
And those tunnels.
Those are potholes.
That's insane.
Potholes are formed by underwater turbulence. And in a flood this swiftly moving with this much turbulence, you literally have vorticular eddies, high intensity, high amplitude, high energy underwater tornadoes, literally underwater tornadoes. Now, these underwater tornadoes are typically, in this case, about a half a mile wide.
Oh, my God.
And they're spinning at a high rate of speed, and they're right there, they're probably 600 feet deep. Because the water pouring over the ridge is at least 200, and you can see what it's done to the bedrock. And in the middle, you see this, it's called a rock blade. See that? The rock blade is that, yes, that's it right there, separating the two alcoves. If the flood had continued for another few days, that rock blade would have been gone, and you would have had a single alcove up there. Now, in the next, as this proceeds, what we're going to do is we're going to go down, and we're going to be right at the head of the rock blade. Right there, yeah, right there. We're standing right there. So now you're going to get to see, as the drone is about to take off, you're seeing the landscape. We're looking to the east in the direction of those Finger Lakes.
Okay, and the landscape opens up. So you're on that rock blade.
We're on the rock blade right
Okay,
there.
that's
So now you
cool.
can begin to see the scale of this thing that we were just seeing from Google Earth.
This is incredible. And then there's water remaining.
Yeah, that filled the potholes, yeah.
God, it's
There you get a sense.
Oh, my God.
There you get a sense of the rock blade.
Well, there you get a sense of what the volume of water must have looked like when it was rushing through there.
Right, and see, this is just,
Holy shit.
we've looked at two features now, Camas Prairie and Potholes Cataract. We could sit here for the next 10 hours looking at dozens and dozens of these mega features. And you look at, there's a whole bar. This is a gravel bar down here.
Over there.
And
Okay.
look at, see the giant ripples
Yeah.
on it? You see those?
Yeah.
I've never seen those reported in the literature. It may be that nobody's ever really seen them before.
Or no one's ever paid attention.
Nobody's ever paid attention, but there they are.
So what is mainstream science used to describe this sort of, or mainstream archaeology used to describe these features?
This would be geology. Well,
Did I say
catastrophic
archaeology?
flooding.
Yeah, what would they, so they believe this is catastrophic flooding as well.
yeah.
They just think it's a slower.
They think it's lots of small catastrophic floods. They're not one big catastrophic flood.
And what kind of timeline are these geologists putting on this?
Oh, 2,000 or 3,000 years.
Yeah.
And why do they think that?
Well, because of the ice dammed model and how much time it would take. See, it gets complicated.
And because until the comet research, there was no credible source of heat that could melt that amount of ice and cause that.
Right.
Now that's the new factor that's come into the
Right.
equation.
Now you look at the people standing on the cliff edge there, the edge of the rock. But do you see them down there?
Yeah.
So now you get the sense of
Scale.
what would survive again in the aftermath.
Not
of
that dude.
No, not that dude. Not that dude or his buddies.
Yeah. This is a crazy place, man. It's crazy to look at. It's just so, when you're looking above it, like even here, I mean, you get a sense of it, but if you had just showed this to me, quite honestly, I probably wouldn't have pieced that together. But when you look at it, the original image, it's so blatantly obvious.
Right. Well, that's the thing now is we are in this position where we can see it. And when I take people out in the field, what I do is I prep them first by showing these images from NASA, the satellite photography, the Google Earth imagery, aerial photography, then ground photography, and then you go out in the landscape. And at that point, you can start having this framework for understanding what you're seeing. Otherwise, you just don't. The scale of it is too vast.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
And this is an adventure of exploration that we're just getting launched on. This is recovering the lost past of humanity. And if I may, I want to make a pitch again for the Comet Research Group. If anybody, I think it's really important. It's not just a matter of funding their research. It's also a matter of sending a message that we the people are prepared to take matters into our own hands and support those scientists who are working with open minds, inquiring into the.
Buddy, listening, you gotta look at this. You have to look at this and then listen to the scale.
This is a gigantic scar in the landscape, of which there are hundreds around this
and
region.
The exact location, Randall?
This is Potholes Cataract.
Right.
The exact location.
Somebody wants to get to it, which we're in Washington State still?
Yes, we're in Washington State. Central Washington. It's going to be right on the Columbia River, just below Wenatchee.
Okay, where
Washington.
we saw that huge erratic, that
Yes, very
giant
close.
18,000-ton boulder brought there, enchained in an iceberg, an iceberg floating on the flood, an iceberg the size of an oil tanker carrying an 18,000-ton boulder, carried on the flood, grounds 700 feet up a valley side, rests there as the floodwaters recede, the ice melts away, and the boulder is left sitting there.
We're going to look at a
Holy
picture
shit.
of that boulder in a second.
What do the people back in this part of the country, what do they think about this?
Well, they're only just catching on to what they're sitting on top of.
Jesus
The first time I went out here in '98, there was the Ice Age Floods Institute, and I went to their only location, which was in the Better Business Bureau in Moses Lake, Washington, and they had one room in the back of this Better Business Bureau, or no, Chamber of Commerce, and there was two elderly ladies in there who were basically the overseers of the group. Now there's about 24 chapters, and every year there's several guided field trips led by geologists who are studying this in their off time. And I've been on a number of these just to participate and get the access to the geologists in order to pick their brains. But this is very close to Wenatchee, Washington. So if anybody's wanting to find this on Google Earth, this is a Google Earth image. Now what we're going to do, but before we leave the Google Earth image, I was going to explain that you got those, see those lakes, those meandering lakes up there. What you got to picture is you've got a sheet of water coming. And as it's coming over this ridge, it's beginning to selectively erode into fault lines and cracks within the bedrock. Can you picture that? The water is going to naturally try to go into those low spots where there's cracks and fissures, and it'll start going from a sheet into channeling. What goes from sheet to a channel, then that spills over the ridge. And you can see in this here that you've actually got three massive currents converging here. Do you see that? Over here on the right, you've got a massive current coming in that would be from the west. And then we would be standing looking down current. Of course, the drone I'm guessing here is about 200 feet in elevation. So the top of the water was another 800 to 900 feet above this perspective right here. And it's moving very, very fast. And it's sweeping down into a river valley that's down in those mountains you see in the distance. And from there, it's being carried down and joining up other equally as large floods coming in from other valleys. And all of this is happening at once, and it's covering 5 states, basically. And that's just one region that's being affected by this sudden catastrophic melting of the ice sheets.
We are dealing with the largest flood that ever occurred on Earth. It's as simple as that.
This is insane. I mean, it's insane to look at.
And
Is
it
it the
happened here
largest?
in North America, and it happened 12,800 years ago, and its story has yet to be fully told. Anything that was in the way of these massive flows of water, would have been rubbed completely from the story.
See, when you understand the extent of this, the scale of this phenomena, and the severity, the inconceivable severity of this, in the aftermath of an event like this, what would remain of a city, a village? Not a goddamn thing.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Not much.
Nothing would exist in the aftermath of this.
And
As recent as 2018, there was a discovery of a crater beneath the surface of an ice sheet in Greenland. It is called the Hiawatha Glacier. The impact diameter of the Hiawatha Glacier is about 1.5 kilometers or 0.9 miles. Though no studies have been conducted in regards to drilling down to the surface of the crater and taking samples of the fragments that are in the area, Some scientists believe that it was an impact that could be as young as 12,000 years ago. Other scientists believe that it could be as old as 43,500 years before present. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis posits that fragments of a large disintegrating asteroid or comet struck North America, South America, Europe, and Western Asia around 12,800 years ago. Multiple air bursts and impacts produced the Younger Dryas boundary layer, depositing peak concentrations of platinum, high-temperature spherules, melt glass, and nanodiamonds, forming an isochronous datum at more than 50 sites across a 50 million kilometers square at more than 50 sites across Earth's surface. Some scientists have proposed that this event triggered extensive biomass burning. A brief impact winter and the Younger Dryas abrupt climate change contributed to extinctions of late Pleistocene megafauna and resulted at the end of the Clovis culture. Here is a map of the suspected impact sites around the globe. To add to this theory, there is the Lake Missoula. To add to this theory, we have evidence of something called Lake Missoula. It was a prehistoric proglacial lake in western Montana that existed periodically at the end of the last ice age, between 15,000 and 13,000 years ago. The lake measured about 7,770 square kilometers, approximately 3,000 square miles, and contained about 2,100 cubic kilometers or 500 cubic miles of water, half the volume of Lake Michigan. The Missoula floods were cataclysmic glacial lake outburst floods that swept periodically across eastern Washington and down the Columbia River Gorge at the end of the last ice age.